Hey, everybody, welcome to the John DeVito Show. I hope everyone's having a good day today. And I was thinking a lot today about my childhood and how things today seem to be a lot more complicated for the young people in the world today. Now, am I wrong? I don't think I am. So I started thinking about some of the things that were different in my childhood as compared to what's different today. And I think back upon my high school years and maybe a little bit of my college years when I was living in New Hampshire. And a lot of times we would have parties in the woods. Who's done this before? I'm sure a lot of you have. I can't see you, but I'm sure a lot of hands are going up right now. And I remember back in the area of New Hampshire I used to live in, we had three distinct areas where we used to go on the weekends and, especially during the summer and party in the woods. So what did it mean to party in the woods? And I'm sure for some of the young people out there that might seem lame. Now you're making TikToks and making videos on Instagram, trying to get followers, trying to get likes, trying to be popular in that way. But back in the day when we didn't have all these forms of social media, we actually did something that is really foreign to a lot of young people today. We actually interacted with each other in person. Can you imagine that? We actually would get together, we would socialize, we would talk, we would have a good time, and we would actually do it with a large group of people and do it together. Now, I know I'm being a little bit facetious. I know there are a lot of kids out there that still go to parties and hang out and do all kinds of fun activities with their friends. But I do think that the world has changed quite a bit due to social media. And for me, I think back on the days where we just loved our weekends, we loved our summers, and we had nothing but campfires in the woods and a keg of beer. And it was. I think back upon some of the times in which we did this. A lot of times you would go to one of these spots and you wouldn't even have plans to really meet anybody in particular, but then just a bunch of people would show up. In some places you had kids that came from different school districts, and some of them maybe were rivals, and you had to worry about getting in fights with the wrong crowd and things like that. But then other places you would go and you'd be surrounded by people that you went to school with, people from different grades, and maybe some kids that had recently graduated, and you would just sit out in the woods at night. You would have a roaring campfire going. You'd have people spread out all throughout the woods. You'd have a keg of beer, and you'd be drinking beer, socializing, and just having a blast with your friends. And if you think back on those days, and we were generally listening to some sort of rock music. I mean, we had some of the best bands of all time when I was a kid. Bands like AC/DC, Led Zeppelin, Leonard Skinner, on and on and on. And we would just sit in the woods, we'd drink beer, sit by a campfire, hang out with friends, do all different types of things like that. So the times were definitely a lot different back in those days. And I know that some things are better today, but I honestly think when you look at the children that are in the world today, you look at the kids that are in school, all the pressures of social media and things like that. I don't think I can fully understand what the kids today are dealing with. Parents always say that. Parents are always like, well, things haven't changed that much since I was a kid. I understand. I've been through all the things that you've been through. In general, a lot of those cases are true. But really, when it comes to the world of social media and the expectations placed on you by those, we lived in a vastly different world than what the younger people of today live in. And it's very difficult, I think, for the young people. I mean, if you really think about the microscope that they live under all the time. I mean, if you happen to drop your tray at lunch, you've got 30 people recording it and posting it on TikTok and Snapchat and different places like that. If you get into a fight in school, everyone's recording the fight, and whether you win or lose, it doesn't really matter. It's out there for everybody to see. If you end up kissing a girl or kissing a boy, you've got 10 people videoing that and posting it all over to Snapchat. So you've got all these pressures that young people face today that we don't have, and you wonder why there is so much anxiety with the younger people in the world today. And if you think about all the other things, like, when we were kids, if you played sports, you played on like a town team and you had X amount of games a year. And then you'd spend the rest of the summer running around with your friends, riding your bikes, having a good time. Now, every kid has to play like three sports every season. You're on travel teams, AAU teams. Every kid's going to be the next superstar that makes $100 million a year in the major leagues or the NFL. And if you really look at the statistics, very few people ever make it to that level of competition. So I really look at the expectations that are on kids today. I look at the anxiety that many kids feel in today's society, and I really feel for them. I think it's unfair in a lot of ways. And then when you put on the pressure of social media where now your popularity isn't really even about sometimes being, captain of the football team or captain of the cheerleaders. It's more about how many followers do you have on Instagram or how many followers do you have on TikTok. And that is just a vastly different world than what we all live in. And unfortunately, you see so many things where people are just pretending on social media and they get followers that are pretending along with them about how their life is so perfect and things like that. But the truth of it is, all of us go through struggles in our lives, whether your life looks perfect on social media or not. We all struggle. We all have hard times. We all face difficulties. And I think for the younger kids in society, when you look at some of the perfection, the manufactured perfection that you see on the internet, I think that sometimes that is affecting the mental health of the children and all the different anxieties that, we parents are placing on them. So I think back on simpler times, and again, I always talk about this. When I say it was simpler times, was it simpler times because I was younger at that point? Did I look at the world through different eyes? Did I have different paradigms where I looked at the world from a much simpler viewpoint and didn't know everything that I know today? I had seen behind the curtain as to what the real world is really like when I was younger. So is that why it seemed like simpler times? Has it always been more complex? I mean, I think to some point, yes, but I think also in some ways, no, because the world's gotten a lot more complex. Children are being exposed to things at a younger age that they should not be exposed to, and it really is taking away their childhood and taking away their innocence far too young in this world. So I think back on the '70s, the '80s. And I know I've done a few shows on this, but I was really thinking about some of the good times that I had as a kid in New Hampshire growing up, and when I keep coming back to the places we used to hang out. Now, I'm going to mention these names. If you're not from the area, you're not going to know where these are. But there were three main places where we used to hang out in my area of New Hampshire. And when I say hang out, I'm not talking about, eight kids sitting by a campfire drinking out of a keg. I'm talking in some cases 100, 200 kids in the woods. I'm talking big parties, rock and roll music blaring, campfire is fired up. People are drinking beer. People are having a good time. And I mean, it was just very memorable. So the areas that I used to go to, there were three separate ones. One was called Sylvester's. It was basically just the name of a road, Sylvester's Road. There was another place called Brandy Brow. And then we had a third place called Moley's Pit. Now, Moley's Pit is near and dear to my heart. It's a place that we had a lot of good parties in the woods. And unfortunately, in that exact location now, in the town where it was located, they actually plowed over those woods and built a Walmart on top of that spot. So every time I go into that Walmart in that particular town in southern New Hampshire, I think of Moley's Pit and all the fun we had there as kids. But we would rotate and go to different places, and very rarely, if ever, did you go to one of these parties where the police came in and broke it up. And I have to believe that the police must have known that we were out partying in the woods. I mean, it was pretty common knowledge that these places existed. But I do remember one party in particular. We were at, I believe it was Moley's Pit, and this was a big one. We must have had, I mean, again, I could be, exaggerating in my mind that it was bigger than it was, but in my mind, I'm thinking at this point, and this was probably, 40 years ago, I'm thinking that we had probably 200 people in the woods. There were people everywhere, people having a good time. You had couples that were dating, making out in the woods. You had people playing drinking games in the woods, sitting by a roaring campfire. The keg was flowing. Just a great night. Music was blaring. And I remember that night in particular where we had a few drinks and we were all feeling, pretty good at that point. And I remember that's when the spotlights kicked in. And all of a sudden we had police officers literally in the woods with flashlights. They were chasing us on foot. So at this party, I remember everybody just scattering. So you had all these underage people scattering through the woods and running for their lives and running for their freedom. Because the last thing you wanted to have happen back in those days was to get arrested and have to call your parents from the local police station for underage drinking in the woods. But I remember running like crazy, and I remember I got away scot-free. And but man, thinking about those times, I mean, thinking about some of the times you spend with maybe girls and boys you liked back in those days, just hanging out, listening to rock, not showing off for anybody, but just being there with your friends, being there with the people who mattered, and connecting with them in person. I do think, even though I'm not promoting underage drinking or any of those things, because I really, at this point in my life, I really don't drink much at all. But I did when I was younger. But I do promote that. I think that our kids have gotten far too serious. They have far too many responsibilities. They have far too many things in their lives that are causing anxiety. And we all need times in our lives where we cut loose and just have fun, And I think as kids, if you look at all the kids today, and you see now all the kids that are on prescription medication, for their ADHD or whatever affliction that they have, and it makes me think, maybe we could cut back on the medication. Maybe we could cut back on the counseling sessions that are needed if the kids today had an opportunity to just cut loose, go out in the woods with a keg and a campfire and have a blast with their friends. Because I don't think it happens nearly enough anymore. So I don't know. Some of you might think I'm crazy, but again, here I am, an old man, just being nostalgic about my teen years and how much fun I had in those years. And when you get a little bit older in age, like again, I mean, I'm not quite decrepit yet, but I'm on my way to being decrepit. But when you get to be my age, you start thinking back on some of the memories that you have, and I think most people get to a point in their lives. I mean, not everybody. Some people are always chasing more. Some people are always chasing more money, more status, whatever. But from my perspective, anyway, the older I get, the less I feel it's important about money and materialistic things, but it's more about the good memories you make in your life. And I think back on some of the memories of us, going to Brandy Brow, going to Sylvester's, going to Molly's Pit back in the day, and just being young, being free, hanging with our friends, not having many responsibilities. It was just a special, memorable time. And was everything perfect in those times? Of course not. We had stresses like everything else. People had problems at home with their families. You got into fights with your friends, boyfriends and girlfriends broke up. I mean, there were a lot of things that happened then that still happen today, obviously. But I just worry that the kids today are not getting enough time out by the campfires with their buddies, with their friends, with a keg of beer, whatever it is, and just chilling out and cutting loose and getting away from the stresses in life. We have become a society that's so driven on just success, financial success. And don't get me wrong, I've talked about this on my podcast quite a bit. I was not a person that grew up wealthy. I was probably, my parents always said middle class. I might have been more lower middle class. I really don't know where I stood on the socioeconomic standards or the economic standards at that point. But I know one thing, we did not have a lot of excess money. I mean, I had clothes, we had food, I had a house. So, we weren't renting an apartment. We were in a pretty good shape. But, my parents had to work very hard for what we have. So I certainly wasn't rich or spoiled or any of those type of things. But, I think I grew up for a long time always wanting more. And I think when you come from a family that, mine, again, middle and lower class, my father grew up very poor. And I think when you have a father that's poor, he always had to fight for everything he had. And that was kind of passed on to us. And we passed it on to our children a little bit, that will to succeed. But I think also in your life, you have to temper that. If you have this undying need to always make more money, always have more, always have a better car, always have a bigger house, this is a battle that you're never going to win. It's going to be a never-ending battle where you are going to be prisoner to the things that you end up owning. They're going to end up owning you. And no matter what you get, you're always going to want more. And that's a very difficult mindset, I think, to be in. So I think that, for me anyway, as I've gotten older, I'm somewhat content with where I'm in my life. I think my wife and I have done well. Are we the richest people in town? No, but we have enough to make ends meet and buy the things we need, and we're able to save some money. So, I mean, that's kind of what I feel is most important. But for me, when I think about my life as a parent, my life as a father, again, the materialistic things I've had over the course of my relationship with my wife, really, none of those things matter at all. It's really about the memories we've created with our children, the memories I've created with my wife. And then I think also, thinking back, I think about the good times I had in my life when I was younger. And it was about that same thing, creating like wonderful memories with people you care about, cutting loose, having some fun. And like I said, I'm not on here advocating that you go out in the woods and get drunk. That's not going to be the solution. I mean, alcohol is never the solution to deal with problems in your life. It may numb you for a while, but the problems are still going to be there when you're no longer drunk. But I do think that we have put in this society too much pressure on our children. They get too much information at an early age, and I don't think that they're emotionally capable of dealing with that in the way that we give it to them in this society of today. So I wish I could take my kids back in a time capsule and just even have them experience a couple of days back in the day. I'm sure initially they'd be pretty bored with the lack of technology that we had back then. But pretty quickly, once you get past the shock of not having all this technology, then I think you really start to understand how we actually lived our lives back then. And it was just different. So I don't know. I guess, I'm just being nostalgic, feeling the need to talk today about my childhood. I guess maybe that's something you do as you get older. You start to reflect back. But this actually started with a Facebook post last night on a page that I follow in the town that I grew up in. And we started talking about this exact thing. I started thinking about all the parties we had, all the good times we had. And, those campfires in the woods, man, they were magical. Still today, we have a fire pit in my backyard here in Massachusetts. And, at least several times in the summer, we have some nice campfires out there. And we sit with the family. My kids go out there with their friends. And it really is a good thing to kind of sit back and just chill and enjoy life a little bit. So, hopefully we can maybe encourage some of the younger people out there to start doing this. And it was funny. I just stopped into a store a little while ago to buy something. And I was literally talking about this before the podcast. And I think that's when I developed the idea to actually do this podcast. And I was talking about campfires in the woods. And there was a guy next to me who was probably in his 60s. He goes, I haven't been to a campfire in the woods in quite a while, but if you're down for it, let's go get it going right now. I remember looking at him going, yeah, you know what, man? It would be a bad idea. We should start pulling this shit together as adults now and just start sort of throwing some wild parties out in the woods by campfires, right? You're never too old. So anyway, and I've got one last story I'm going to tell you. I think you'll find this funny. This was not related to a campfire party in the summer, but I still remember one high school party that I went to. And I will never forget this party. And I'm sure that this story came up in their family for many years to come. But there was a girl that had a party. Now, I went to an all-boys high school in Massachusetts. Yes, I know, that sucked. I still remember my first day there, just kind of wondering what in the hell I was thinking. But anyway, it was a great school. It's now co-ed, but it was a fantastic school that I went to. And I'm very proud that I went there. But I remember one party, there was a girl from one of the all-girls schools that was down the street from us. She had a party at her house in the city of Lawrence, Massachusetts. So we went to her house, and it was a pretty good rager. Her parents, I think, were out for the night, or I don't even know if we knew. We just knew they weren't home. She was having a party, and there were quite a few people at this party. It was a pretty good party. We were rocking, but then I remember it started to get a little out of hand. Someone actually broke their kitchen table, and I'm sure that mom and dad did not appreciate that when they got home. My parents would have killed me. But I remember as we were hanging out drinking, all of a sudden the girl yells out, "Oh my God, my parents are home." This house was packed. Now, I was a big person in high school. I played football in high school. I was captain of my team, ended up playing in college as a lineman. So I'm a big person. And I remember we were all running out of the house. We wanted to get out of there before our parents came in and yelled at us. So I run out of the house, go into my car. I take a left turn in the dark, and I literally just crush somebody. And I mean, I hit this person with everything I had. It wasn't intentional. I didn't see them. This person fell on their back on the ground, and their feet went back up over their heads and literally almost did a backward somersault for the hit I just laid on this person. I looked down. It was the girl's father. I literally ran into her father, knocked him, ass over tea kettle or whatever, however the hell that goes, and just buried him. I remember I looked down at it as I was leaving. I'm like, "Oh my God, sir, I'm sorry." And I apologize, but then I ran because I knew I was dead. I just knocked her father down. I can't imagine what this girl faced when her father came in the house. Not only did she have a giant party at her house, not only was her kitchen table broken into pieces, but as they arrived home from their date night or wherever the hell they were, they come home and some 255-pound guy levels him in the driveway of his own house. I don't think we ever had a party at that house again, and I luckily did never ran into that man again. But I think back on some of the parties. I mean, I should do a podcast telling stories about some of the high school parties we went to. All right, I'm going to tell you one more. I'm at 20 minutes, but this one will be worth it. Now, I remember when I was in high school, I went to that all boys Catholic school. So there were people from all the towns around the school that went to this private school where I went. So I was captain of the football team my senior year. And in a basketball game, my parents were gone for the weekend. I decided at a basketball game with my friends that night I was going to throw a party at my house. So I don't think I really planned for how many people were going to find out about this party. But we ended up, now think about it. I was captain of the football team. We were at this basketball game that was packed, and these were kids from all over the area. So they all called their friends, told their friends about the party that was happening at my father's house, gave out the address to everybody. And I literally had a party at my father's house that was unbelievable. We had one of my football buddies, this guy Bob, that I'm still good friends with today. He was another lineman. We went in and party proofed the house before the party. You know, took down all the breakables. I mean, my parents didn't have a huge house and not a ton of valuable stuff, but we didn't want to break what they had that they really loved. So we took down all their valuables and protected the house. This party, I'm telling you, we live on this street in New Hampshire, and I would say about I don't know, maybe a mile, maybe a half a mile. I'm not sure how it is, three-quarters of a mile from my parents' house. There was this little pond called Captain's Pond, and the cars were parked on both sides of the street, almost all the way down to the pond. My parents' house, there was not one place to stand in this home. I'm talking about all three bedrooms, the bathrooms, the family room, the living room, the hallways, the kitchen, the dining room, filled with people. And it was the middle of winter, and even outside in the yard, there were people everywhere, backyard, front yard. This thing was a bash. And honestly, I wasn't having fun. I was stressed that my parents' house was going to get destroyed. But then, of course, like in every small town, the police arrived, and remember going out with the police officer, and told him, yeah, this party got out of hand. I didn't think this many people were going to come. So he ended up making a bunch of the people leave, and he said he was actually pretty nice about it. He said if I need any help, let them know, and they could come back and kick everybody out of the house. So I thanked him and appreciated that. But now the problem that happened was when the police arrived, everybody in the house hid their beer. So they were sticking it wherever they could do it, in laundry baskets, in the washer and dryer, inside the stove, in the counters, everywhere. So literally, there were beers stacked everywhere in my parents' house, and my parents were pretty strict. So the party ended, everyone went home, the house survived, we put everything back in place, and we went on a hunt for all the hidden beers. We were finding beer every place, inside the hutch in the dining room, in the bathroom closets, in the toilet paper rack. There was beer everywhere. So we searched the house, found all of the beers, or so we thought, and my parents came home, and my friend had left. The house was nice and neat, like they left it. And my parents walked in and they said, "Huh, the house looks cleaner than when we left." And I remember looking and going, "Yeah, well, we just tried to keep it clean, and whatever. I'm fairly neat," which I wasn't, but I tried to pass that off. And at that point, my father, we had like a big window overlooking the back deck, and we had a swimming pool in the back. So there was a long curtain where you pulled the string, and it would open from left to right. So my father decides when he got home to open that curtain to get some sunlight into the room. He pulls the curtain back, and there it is laying on the floor. One last soldier that we did not find, a beer can behind the curtain. And of course, my father looks and goes, "What's this?" And I said, "Oh, Dad, we had a couple of people over, and, well, one of them brought a few beers, nothing big." So, he didn't ask any more questions, probably didn't want to know. But the next day I was outside doing yard work, and one of the neighbors from way down the street, who was actually the veterinarian for our dogs and our cats where we live, he's walking by with his wife, and he's like, "John, quite a party you had last night at your house, huh?" I'm like, "Yeah, I know. Don't tell my parents." And they both laugh. So anyway, just stories from my childhood, stories of old parties and things like that. But honestly, in today's day and age, I'd like to see us all allow our kids to take some of the pressure off, release some of the anxiety, let them know that not everything's going to be perfect, not everything has to be perfect, and hopefully we get to a point in our society where people spend a little bit less time on social media because it's just not healthy for anybody. So for all you young people out there, I'm just telling you, campfires, kegs of beer in the woods, and good music. It worked in the 80s, it worked in the 70s, and I'm sure it worked before that. Might be a good time to bring it back now. All right, I love all you guys. Have a great day. Thank you for tuning into the John DeVito Show, and I hope you all have a great night. Bye-bye now.